This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning, Ethan. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Surviving.
Awesome. Just survive it. You should be thriving.
Parenthood is all just about surviving. Is what it is.
That's not true. Maybe for a short period of time, but
yeah, it's all good.
What do we got today? What's going on? What's happening? What are we doing?
Well, this is going to be the first podcast in our newly created series of 4. Mm-hmm. And we're going to walk through the phases of emergency management.
Which are what?
Prevention.
Don't look at the cheat sheet.
I'm not looking at the cheat sheet. I'm looking right at you. Prevention, mitigation, preparation, response, and then recovery.
And why is that important that we're doing this?
You can address problems or threats or whatever you want to call it within these different phases. And the way you do that is going to be different depending on what phase it's in. I don't know if I articulated that the way that you imagined it going. But...
Well, yes and no. So it's a perfectly fine answer.
Okay. That sounds like a B- kind of thing, but...
Yeah, no. It's it wasn't really what I was going for. But that's okay. It was probably the
take 2
how I framed the question. But what I was asking was, why is this important to us? Why do we have to even work through these phases and so forth? So, and you kind of touched on it even without me asking the proper question. And that is, we have a tendency to look at a single problem and address a single aspect of that problem. And so we don't really understand the whole picture. And I use this relatively frequently as an example. We were talking to some of our customers in a group setting, a Zoom group, and we were introducing some new features and so forth for Crisis Go. And I forget what the features were, primarily because I was so shocked at this response. And it was essentially, we're not worried about responding. We're focused entirely on prevention. You know me, because everything I do is to help prevent, identify, address all of that stuff, understanding that we can't do that 100% of the time, and we are going to have a failure point. And that's what everything else is understanding that you have a failure point. And you're likely going to see failure points in every positive effort that you do. You're just not going to be able to address it. Every one. You're not going to be successful every time.
How can you ensure that your prevention methods are perfect?
I'm just telling you they're not.
You're human, and the influences around you are either human or nature. And either one has a level of unpredictability to it.
Especially when we're talking about human behaviors and societal problems, community problems, socioeconomic problems, blah, 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 all the way through those. You have zero control on all of those other influences. And you have zero control, even in your little bubble of the school. you have almost zero control over many of the influences and the forces at play. And you have absolutely zero control. You might have impact, but you have zero control on how somebody reacts to those influences and forces at play.
Mm.
And oftentimes we hear that is that it's not what's thrown at you, it's how you react to it. It's how you respond to it. But having the framework of the FEMA guidelines allows us to do many, many things and be reflective and understand that every incident has its unique characteristics. But if we are working within the framework and we understand the purpose of that framework, we can work our way through every problem. And when I say work, I mean work, not just outlast it, not just wait for it to go away all by itself. Because you want to have at least a fighting chance to walk away with the most successful operation or response or prevention that you can get to. And when I say most successful, many times people will say that your most successful operation was a failure. And we all talk about that concept in detail as we go through this series. We're going to get into some depth into these things. I think we probably jumped ahead a little bit further than I had originally wanted to, because we have some other things that we want to talk about first, right?
Yeah. I mean, you jumping ahead is not uncommon.
That's true.
That's all right.
I get rolling.
Anyone who's been listening understands.
Yep.
I will start off with a article
That ties into this, right?
That does tie into our first in our series here. So the title is Family of Student Who Died by Suicide Sues School District. We read this a little bit earlier, and so this student was a 13-year-old, and according to the article, had some diagnosed mental issues, if that's the right way of saying that. So what occurred?
It could be processing issues as well.
Sure.
Right.
Okay.
So it could be part of a learning disability.
Learning disability. Yeah. The way they describe it is they say neurodivergent, which is a really broad. A lot of things can be underneath that. So
Yep.
I'm not really sure exactly what it was. But
Yep.
so basically, to kind of summarize what happened earlier this year, the student, I guess, expressed some concern of some medical concern on the outer part of his body and recorded it on Snapchat, and then recorded maybe a little too much. And then the video was saved by fellow students and then distributed throughout the school. It says, according to the parents, I think it was a vice principal, like, questioned the students, like, hey, did you do this? And they just said, nope, we didn't do it. And then no further action was taken. And then there's also something in here about how he was accused of having a gun on campus, which he didn't. So just kind of continuous bullying of the student. And then the student unfortunately took his own life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like a middle schooler, right?
So the student was 13 years old.
Mm-hmm. There's lots to unpack there, but where this ties into our overall discussion for the next 4 podcasts is this framework of being competent to respond to these tragedies, these emergencies. And really that starts with that sort of prevention stage. And did we have or miss an opportunity to prevent this tragedy from occurring? And we'll get into more of the steps. And obviously the family believes that they missed that opportunity.
Mm.
The school missed that opportunity. We've said this before. Oftentimes, and it varies state to state, but oftentimes our schools have some level of immunity in their actions. What that means is they're not actually culpable for doing things that they should have done or didn't do, or they did them incorrectly. And the immunity in many cases they believe is absolute, and that is rarely the case. And if the actions are not prudent, or they're less than they should have been, they weren't in accordance with policy, they weren't in accordance with generally accepted practices and so forth, they were negligent, then they can be sued. So if they're outside of the scope of the school expectations, or what is normally expected, their actions, then they can be sued for that stuff. They're not completely immune from being sued. So with that caution, and we're looking at what are those steps, and one of the steps was, I see this all the time. I actually see this in many of the accepted best practices for threat assessments, is when you bring in the subject of your assessment, or you bring in the subjects of the bullying, those who are conducting, they're actually doing the bullying, and they say, I didn't do it. There's a tendency for many of our educators to stop there and say, oh, okay, as opposed to taking the next step, right? And saying, okay, you say you didn't do it. However, I have this person, this person, this person who have showed me evidence, or they've all stated that you were the one that was doing this, or finding some other way, taking that next step to validate or discount the statements made, because people who are getting in trouble have a reason to lie or mislead you.
There's motive.
There's motive there. That's exactly right. And in the threat assessment side of it, I've seen it time and time again. And I actually think some of the experts are getting this wrong, absolutely getting it wrong, and is contributing to part of the continued violence and hindering us in getting ahead of this. And that is, if you do a threat assessment and you have to determine whether or not it was what they call a transient threat, somebody just out of anger spurts off, I'm going to kill you. They have no means, they have no real intent, etc. And then there's substantive. There is some substance to that threat. However, the recommendation is when you're talking to them, if they apologize and they retract it, then they consider that it was transient. If somebody who actually has the intent and manner or is in that process walking down the pathway of violence, and they say, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't really mean it, I was just joking, we have a tendency to take them for face value and say, okay, don't do that again, as opposed to investigating and doing a proper assessment. Because people who are in that state will say, yeah, I was just joking. You know why? Because they know that they'll get in trouble if they admit to it.
Yeah.
They know that their plans will be foiled if they admit to it. If I admit to it, all of the effort that I've put forth is wasted. And it hasn't corrected my problem. We've already said, when we're talking about the pathway to violence, we have already said that they have an ideology, that violence is a solution to their problem. And if we're just going to accept face value, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I was just joking. I just wanted to get attention. And we're saying that that's an acceptable answer. No need to go any further. Then we're going to continue to be where we're at today.
Like there's no other instance that we accept that.
Well, there's all kinds of instances where that's accepted.
Like outside of
threat, right? Anytime you misbehave or anytime you do something that you know you're going to get in trouble for, you try to mitigate that. You try to lessen the impact on yourself.
Right.
Deflect it, right? So I think it tells us we need to explore those things much deeper.
Let's talk about your time versus magnitude.
Well, let's get back into really before we get too much further down this, because I was talking about that in the context of the article. What is prevention and mitigation, right? And really what prevention is those actions are those actions that we take to make sure that we're protected, that we're safe, that nothing happens to us. And then we talk about that point of failure that I always talk about. And should we be unable to actually prevent it, what are we going to do to decrease the impacts, mitigate the impacts on our students, our staff, our community, right? And I say all three because everything that happens at a school impacts students, staff, and the entire community and beyond, right? Because as almost every, especially when you're talking about violence, almost every incident is going to be politicized. So now you have a national impact. So let's decrease that. But it's those steps. And when we look at those steps, what do we need to do, really? We need to know what those threats are. We need to know what those hazards are. And in fact, in most states, they require that you have an all hazards plan. You can't have an all hazards plans if you don't know what those hazards are. And so
makes sense.
Here's where I think we lose a lot of our educators specifically is, what do you mean all hazards? Every hazard that you are likely going to face. It's pretty simple. But here's the problem, is when you start identifying every threat, they take it as meaning every circumstance, every incident. And that's not the intent there.
You're saying that we're getting too granular? We're thinking too specific?
Yep.
Okay.
What if the perpetrator of violence is driving a blue car instead of a red car?
Yeah. What if he's driving a Chevy and not a Ford?
Not a Ford, right? And that's part of the system.
Yeah.
After every incident, we pick out one little thing and we start addressing that one little thing.
Self-overwhelming.
Yeah. And you just like, how can I do this? And so when we're talking about how overwhelming all plans are and having an all hazards plan, what we're really talking about is looking at it from a macro level, high level. Categorize your threats: violence, hazardous materials, weather related, accidental. Like, what if something accidentally unpredictable happened? Somebody ran into a power pole. There was an accident outside, a vehicle accident outside of your campus that had a fuel truck. And look at that and do that. And here's the way that I say, let's look at that. Let's look at, there are generally what I call three types of causes, manners in which we, man-made, natural, and accidental. Start with those. What are the man-made ones? Obviously, violence. Obvious intentional acts, to like a bomb threat is an intentional act. Somebody purposely sabotages your computers. So cybersecurity stuff, intentional, man-made act, right? Those types, man-made. Natural, weather, earthquakes, floods. You can have a flood without having weather because you're downstream. It happens a lot in the deserts where you have torrential thunderstorms up in the mountain area surrounding the deserts, and then you have flash floods from the runoff. I've been in a couple of those crazy things, but the weather wasn't where the damage was. Right.
Or you can have internal flooding.
Yep.
One of my relatives here, they're the kid goes to school, and he was telling me that he was in like the cafeteria maybe,
Mm-hmm.
and he looked up at the ceiling, and he could literally see the ceiling start to like do this.
Oh, bow.
Like bow, and he like, pretty sure that's like a water. The ceiling's filling with water.
Yeah.
And he said he like pointed it out to one of the adults there, and they're like, "No, it's not that." And he's like, "I'm pretty sure it's that." And they didn't do it. So then eventually it just burst, and like
Right.
the whole ceiling came down. I was like, wow, okay.
Pipes break, especially in your area during the winter, right? Pipes freeze. And so it's those types of things. But once you identify those categories and you say, okay, we have violence, we have these man-made things, then we look at the natural ones, and then we look at the accidental ones, right? But what we're also trying to do is determine from a prevention and a mitigation phase, and I think this is something that a lot of people don't quite understand, is we have to, in order for us to prevent something from happening, we have to understand its characteristics. So we have to identify it as a potential threat. And if we're going to identify it as a potential threat, there are things that we want to do should we fail at preventing it. In our world, we have the standard response protocols from I Love You Guys Foundation. Categorically, I call those emergency protective actions, actions that we take to protect ourselves and our students and staff and visitors from harm. Those actions. Oftentimes, we get so marred down in the details that we don't understand the category that it's in, so we don't understand what action that you want me to take. What are the two things that we need to know as humans during a crisis?
What's going on, and what do you need me to do?
That's it. If you understand the characteristics of those events, and you understand that there's a failure point for every hazard, that's why it's a hazard, and threat. That's why it's a threat. There is a failure point. You failed to prevent it. You failed to mitigate it. And we've talked about it. There is really no way you can prevent everything from happening. You just can't. Anybody who thinks that is just dancing with the devil. If you don't understand the point of failure or the potential of that failure, you don't understand what actions you need to take. Once you identify all of those hazards in those major categories, violence, natural disasters, weather, accidental things that could happen there, all of those potential things. Once you've identified those, take the standard response protocols and make columns out of them. lockdown, secure, shelter, evacuate, hold. You've made a list, just brainstorming, you've made a list of all of these things that could potentially happen to you. You've put them in these major categories: violence, threats. Put them in these major categories. And you take those major categories and say, if we have violence, what is the proper action? Lockdown. If you have violence that is outside of your building or the potential of coming closer to you, you take that, put it in secure. If you have fire as an example, as a potential, put it in the evacuation. Hazardous materials, if that's a potential for you, that goes into shelter. If you have a weather event, that could go into shelter, right? Depending on the weather, you might need to evacuate because you've had flooding. So we need to evacuate the building. So that goes there, right? So what you're doing is building hazards and connecting them to the actions that you want, right?
That already sounded way more simple the way you were saying that. If you're just thinking like, not like student on student violence or outside threat violence or this violence or, you know, loose bear in your school violence or something. It's just violence. Like, let's just look at it in this way.
So the other component is where is it happening?
Mm-hmm.
Right? If it's outside, you generally lock down, secure, shelter, right? Hold, maybe. If it's happening inside your building, you might have a lockdown, but at some point you're going to have to evacuate it, right? So this is where you start drilling down into some of the different scenarios and stuff. All hazards doesn't mean every potential scenario. Here's the plan for active shooter. I don't need to have a different plan for active shooter in the lobby, another one for the playground, another one for the cafeteria, another one for 9:05 a.m., another one for 1:55 p.m. I don't need a different plan for that. I need to know what the macro is and what the objectives are, right? So, and we'll get into those in just a bit. The reason I tell people you need to do tabletops, change the time of the incident. You need to have scenario-based exercises and drills. You need to work through these. It's not to create a plan. It's to gain knowledge and experience on how to respond to, because that's what we're really looking at, how to train for these scenarios, these major categories of violence, right? So I'll give you an example. Everyone knows I'm a member of, well, not everyone knows, but many people know that I'm a member of the National Council of School Safety Directors. I get some of my questions and material that I respond to from there, from people asking these questions. And one of the questions came up is, has anyone ever done scenarios based upon domestic violence situations at the school? There was a lot of, I've never thought of that. How do we deal with that? Good question. These types of things. I'd be interested in finding out. The reality is it's a violent situation. There are different levels of violence. And it's a violent categorized deal. So you have domestic violence as a potential for a lockdown, a secure, so forth, right? Domestic violence in its name has violence. So if you have violence inside your building, that's likely a lockdown. And if it's outside, it's likely a secure, right? For your interior, for those inside. But what do you do with all those people outside? Maybe that's a situation where they have to take care of themselves or evacuate from the immediate vicinity. But when you're talking about protecting the people inside your school, it's either a lockdown or a secure. It doesn't matter who's committing the violence or the circumstances. It's you have violence. It's categorized as violence. What do we do? Lockdown or secure, depending on what your circumstances are. So when you tabletop that scenario and you say, and it's becoming actually violent. Somebody pulls a weapon out. Somebody goes to maybe they're arguing and screaming at each other in the lobby, and then one of them says, "You're going to pay for this." Walks out and comes back with a weapon. Right? So it's actually turning violent. During your exercise, this is what you're doing. Okay, we started with an argument that's getting out of control. What do you want your staff to do? It's there. You have no law enforcement there. You have your office staff. You have, what do you have there? What are the circumstances there? And now you can start saying, okay, somebody needs to call 911. Somebody needs to press a button that puts everyone into a secure. If they're running out, somebody's saying in the heat of the moment, "You're going to pay for this. You'll see." And they run out. Somebody needs to lock that door so that person can't get back in.
Yeah.
When they turn around and they start coming back, calls need to be made, those types of things. But all you're doing is saying, what do you want me to do? Here's what's happening. We have a violent act. What do you want me to do? And now we're talking about adding knowledge, skills, decision making. We're adding to all of that. Who do you want me to notify? If I have to lock down my school because of a violent domestic situation, who do you want me to notify? 911, district staff, principal if he or she is not there, whoever else, right? If they come back with a gun, maybe you start ambulances that way. I don't know. I don't know your situation. That's where you have to start looking at it. We don't need 1,000 different active shooter scenarios. We need to understand the objectives. We need to understand, generally speaking, what it is. And then we look at the information, the details that we're getting, and then we deal with them based upon that. Right? Generally speaking, if you look at an emergency response to any act of violence, there are generally, I don't know, but maybe there are 10 things that you need to do.
So it sounds like maybe we're making this more complicated than it needs to be.
Absolutely we are. Absolutely we are.
It's actually easier than we think. At least less steps than we think.
There are 3 objectives. In any plan, you have to have an objective.
Mm-hmm.
And there are generally 3 objectives that apply to every situation in your school. Every situation. Stop the killing. Stop the dying. Start the recovery. If we are making decisions based upon those 3 objectives, we've got 99% of our issues licked. But you're saying stop the killing doesn't apply to all of these other things. Absolutely does. We're talking about emergencies. And let's define the emergency. An incident that is likely to harm others.
If you just let it go, if you don't do anything,
people are going to die. People are going to get injured. So when you say stop the dying or the killing, is in a flood, you're moving the kids from a low-lying area to an elevated area to get them above the water so that the waters don't kill them. If somebody gets swept away or injured, if you don't deal with whatever their injuries are, they're going to die. So now you need to get them to you need to get them medical attention, whether that's by emergency medical services, the paramedics, the EMTs, first aid, whatever. Stop the bleed is a big thing that has been proven time and time again to stop people from dying who, if you leave them unattended, will continue to lose blood. So you stop the bleed and you save that person. So you're stopping the dying. And then the recovery. The recovery is a huge thing that's universal in any emergency, right? Somebody's going to be emotionally impacted. Somebody's going to be physically impacted. Your building, your site, your infrastructure is going to be impacted. So let's get that all back as close to pre-event status as possible. It's not ever going to be completely the same, but that's our goal there. So if we're looking at those objectives and if we ever stumble into making a decision, refer back to stop the killing, stop the dying, start the recovery. If there is no more killing, that's no longer a problem. If all of your injured people are being treated and are sent to medical attention, getting medical attention, that's no longer your problem. If you are actively working and or have taken all of the steps that you can take to either initiate or recover from, then that's no longer an issue and your incident's over. Understanding that pathway, and when we're talking about, so everything that we've been talking about right now is really about response. Response is where on that left of bang, generally to the right.
Yeah.
But this whole thing that is about prevention. But now we have to look at, if we can identify the hazards and we can identify the failure points, then we have to take one step back and go to the left, because bang in left of bang is that failure point. In our next part 2 of this is preparation and so forth. But as we get down there, we need to understand those steps in the pathway. Every threat has a pathway. Every event has a timeline. We have bang as the failure point, but we can respond to things before they become a failure. So we can respond to threats and immediately take action and respond to the threat and prevent the killing, prevent people from dying, and prevent the need for recovery. We generally think of response starting at the failure point.
Yes.
Our first responders think of something just happened, I'm going to need help. They come. But if we start looking at response and we identify the pathway and where people are at, or where the threat is or the hazard is along that pathway, and we start establishing thresholds for action. If you see this, you do this. That's what prevention is. And what we're doing is trying to move the response, not remove bang, because bang is still a failure point. What we're trying to do is move the response to the left a little bit so that we never get to bang. We're trying to create thresholds. Those are our prevention points, intervention points.
I like your quote here of, if you can identify it, you can influence it.
That's right. But you have to be able to identify it first.
Yep.
So if you identify the pathway You identify those steps, and you have macro steps and micro steps, especially when we're talking about bullying, because and when you're talking about the pathway to violence and victimization, it's likely not just one thing. It's probably hundreds of different actions.
Yeah, I mean, even in this article we talked about, it wasn't just a one-time thing. It was they recounted that their kid had been bullied multiple times.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. If you understand those, and once you determine thresholds, then you can say, if this happens, we're going to do this. So what we're doing is really trying to identify those points in which you want some action to take place. And so if somebody reports bullying, what do you want them to do? If somebody reports concerning behaviors, what do you want them to do? If somebody is leaving the doors unlocked, what do you want them to do? If somebody is putting flammable materials next to the boiler, what do you want them to do? If somebody is using unauthorized websites that subject your systems to cyber security issues, what do you want to happen? What do you want? How do they report it? And if they report it, what do you want the receiver of that report to do? So those are the thresholds. We've identified our hazards. We've categorized them. We've looked at the 3 objectives. Now we have to look at, obviously, our systems, our policies, and the people that we have, right? The 3 pillars. We put those and we examine those under that sort of lens. And then we create our plans. What we're trying to do here is build everything, the foundation, the framework, the expectations, roles, those types of things. We're trying to build that sort of framework and foundation for what we're going to talk about next week: preparedness. And just real quick, that means training. That means identifying gaps in our safety and security systems. That means we need to establish process improvement processes. That means we need to address what you want your people to do. So training, and establishing those pre-event, we're going to coin this phrase here and now, those pre-event thresholds, where early actions can prevent and or mitigate what is happening. I'll give you a real life example, and as soon as I start talking about it, you're going to know. We had a threat known to the school 30 minutes before there was an actual shooting. I'm not going to fault them for what they did. But if we look at, you receive an unknown credible threat, and I will say, I would argue anybody that was not a credible threat. That was an absolutely credible threat, and I can go into that, but I'm not going to go into it now. But
I'm just like, I just want to like.
Yeah, I know you do. Don't. Don't.
I want to add to it.
Yeah, I know. But we had that information. And if you get to this credible threat of a person and you don't know where they're at, that threat has not been isolated. That person isn't controlled in your office or has law enforcement talking to them right now. What do you want them to do? What's the prudent thing to do? Mine is lockdown, because you're looking for the threat. It's out there somewhere. It's credible, right? You don't know when it's going to happen, but this is something. So take some action. What is that action? And had we taken that action, who knows what could have prevented and or mitigated that from occurring, right?
I think
So
that goes to, you always say it's easier to de-escalate than to escalate.
it is.
So I think that's pretty
Yep.
applicable. That
Yeah. So
what's the harm in going right up to the starting at that lockdown point
right.
and then de-escalating down? Like, what are you risking? What are you losing as opposed to the alternative?
Yeah, that what's the worst case scenario, right?
Mm-hmm.
Worst case scenario is you're wrong and nothing was ever going to happen. But you took the appropriate actions to prevent it or mitigate it. And the worst case is you just ran an unannounced drill.
Yeah.
Based upon real life situations. Now you can say, okay, did this happen correctly? Where did we go wrong here? This is that process improvement I was talking about. What could we do better? Is this something that we need to address? Right? Does this person really have an issue that maybe it wasn't realistic that it was going to occur today? In prevention, you may not be able to establish that. You just know it didn't happen today. So what else do you need to do? So now we need to intervene. We need to do an assessment. We need to do all kinds of things in that scenario. But it shows that if we had established the pathway to violence, we received it. Now what? Now what do you want me to do to prevent and mitigate its impacts?
I just realized your pre-event thresholds acronym is PETS. I've been giggling on the inside ever since
Yeah, I
I
bet you
figured
have.
that out.
Yeah. Well, good for you. I never
Establish your pets.
establish your pre-event thresholds. But
I like it. It's good.
Right. And so, and part of that is training people. It's not just how to respond, it's how to identify those pre-event indicators that need to be dealt with. If I see the door open, do I walk past it? Or do I walk down the hall 20 feet, shut it, and make sure it's locked? If you have a policy, you should, that all of those exterior doors should be locked and shut. A pre-event indicator is that door is open and it is accessible to anybody. So I walk over, I shut it, make sure it's locked, and then what do? What's the purpose of having that door locked?
So that people that aren't supposed to be there don't walk in.
Don't go walk in. So if it's been left open and unmonitored, what's the worst case scenario?
That someone has already walked through that door.
That's correct.
That's not supposed to be there.
So what do you want me to do?
Protect the kids.
How?
You have to isolate the threat, but you don't know where the threat is.
You don't even know if there's a threat.
Right.
Let's start by reporting it. Let's start by
tip line. Hey, there you go.
Tip line. Let's start by just sending a message to everybody saying, "Hey, I found this door open. So can you make sure that you have everyone that you're supposed to have, and there's no dude walking around the school like we had a report of not too long ago, a couple weeks ago, I think it was, where there was a non-student, as it was described, that was walking around for like 3 hours."
Yeah, that's crazy.
Can we send our administrators to kind of just walk the campus?
Would
walk the hallways, check the bathrooms? I don't know.
So,
but
sincere question for you. Let's say in that scenario, I'm a teacher and I see an exterior door open, and I do the I think the right thing, and I close that door and make sure it's locked.
Mm-hmm.
Is a tip line the right way of going about telling someone about that?
No.
No.
Do you want to know why?
Is tip line is the main thing really just to report like bullying and stuff like that, behavioral concerns, or could it ever be used for something like that?
It could be, but what you're trying to do is intervene in something that is
Hmm.
happening right now, right?
So even if your tip line was like integrated and like it automatically went to whoever it needed to go to, depending on what the type of concern it was,
Mm-hmm.
it still wouldn't be the best practice
It's
to
not
use
the
tip
quickest
line.
way to get something done.
Okay.
There's often a time parameters. So depending on what it is and how they reported it, it might have a pretty open response time requirement. And I remember when I was a safety director, I got every tip.
Hmm.
Principals only got the ones that pertain to their schools. So I would look at the tip and say, yeah, they can deal with it, or no. And I would text them and said, go look at your tip line. You've got something you need to address. Luckily or thankfully, depending on your perspective, I never had anything that needed immediate attention.
Hmm.
But when you're talking about what's the purpose of the door and what's the purpose of saying go over and shut that door and then report that, the hope is that you shut it before anyone who was not authorized into the building came into the building, right? That's your hope. The worst case scenario doctrine, that's another thing I just came up with. Is that Roscoe? No. What is that? What's the acronym for that?
Yeah.
But the worst case scenario is that you closed it too late. Somebody's already in the building.
Yeah.
So what you need to do is make sure that the person who's responsible for that knows that it's happening. What you're trying to do is shift that responsibility from the teacher who or the staff member who discovered it to somebody who can take care of it without interrupting your day. Because obviously, I'm not saying lockdown, security count. We would do
Yeah.
that in
Yeah.
the jail, right? If I was
Mm.
in a jail setting and I found a door that was supposed to be secured open, I would lock that thing down, hit an alarm, and we would we would put everyone, we'd stop all movement, and we would do a count.
Why wouldn't you do that in a school?
Because there's so many. First of all, it's not a jail setting, right?
I know
So
I'm asking a somewhat rhetorical question, but
yeah, so but it's a question, and it's not why wouldn't you? And it would be, are you kidding me? You're going to expect me to put them into lockdown or secure until we, or a hold until we find something is not happening, because the chances really are that nothing is happening. But you can't discount it.
hmm.
But you can take actions based upon your threshold, your pre-event threshold indicators. If you find this open, I need to know that. So, as a security director or as the person responsible for that building, maybe a principal or an assistant principal, report it. And then we can make a decision based upon the information that you gave us that you've locked this door. And maybe you noticed it was secure earlier, but now it's open. And you saw it secured 10 minutes prior. 10 minutes later, it's open. So now the assumption is that it's been open for 10 minutes, right?
Mm.
And so during that time frame, what could happen in that 10 minutes? And then we go and we start If you have somebody in your class or you've seen somebody who doesn't belong here, please let me know. We can start looking in bathrooms. We can start checking the hallways, checking the playgrounds, right? Checking storage rooms. And that takes only a couple minutes to do, especially if you got a few people doing that. And it's less disruptive. Everyone can really go about their business. And then you could say, okay, I checked. I didn't find anybody. And nobody's the wiser. The person who reported it, the mere fact that you put that out, and you could say, hey, we had a door left open and we're just making sure everyone's safe. You can, with Crisis Go, you can do that with a check-in.
I was about to bring that up.
Yep, you can do that with a check-in.
You took it out of my mouth.
Oh, sorry. I'll take it back. You want to ask me something? You want to ask me something, Ethan?
Yes, the check-in feature of Crisis Go would be perfect for the scenario that you just posed.
You just post it. Yep.
Exactly that.
Boom. Here it is. And you can say, and you can explain it. Hey, we had a door left open. So people are reinforced that every time you leave a door open like that, I'm going to send
Everyone's going to know.
Everyone's going to know.
Yeah.
And it also allows me to investigate. I can go to that door, right? And see if somebody's moving equipment in or out, like let's say the band people who have to move drums and instruments and stuff. They have a truck, or there's some maintenance going on, or what have you, right? You can determine whether that was legitimately propped open for a reason. And there are times that you need to do that. But it reinforces people that every time that they leave the door open that's supposed to be shut, you're going to check it. And you're going to have to stop for that 30 seconds and say, are you good? Yep. Right? We're just checking to make sure that there's no unauthorized people in our building. So the next question then comes in. Somebody doesn't respond, or they respond in the negative, whatever that means, depending on how you word the question.
Yeah.
What do you do in that case? Those are the questions that you have to talk about. Those are the thresholds that we have to establish. And it all starts with prevention. And it's not just preventing, it's identifying what you need to prevent and how you're going to do that. The expectations, the roles, the necessary trainings, the equipment you might need, first aid equipment, stop the bleed kits, choking devices that pull stuff out of people's throats when they're choking. Those types of things. Do I need those for this scenario? Yep. Okay. Right. Do I need lockdown buckets? Because I'm going to have kids locked down for 3 hours.
Oh, you said lockdown buckets. I was like, what does he mean by that?
Oh, you don't know what a lockdown bucket is?
Oh,
it's
no.
It's exactly what you think it is. It's a 5
You said it.
bucket.
I'm like, you can't be saying that. No, that's what he meant.
I don't think maybe they would be used, but I'm thinking that.
Man, I'm holding that. I'm holding it.
Maybe.
No.
I had this discussion the other day. When I say the other day, on Monday, and today's Wednesday. We tend to drill for an action. We want you to train for a lockdown. What does that mean? Locks, lights, out of sight. We want you to train for that so you have muscle memory, so that when you do that, you understand exactly what you're supposed to do. Here's what we don't train for. The actual event in being in that situation for an extended period of time.
I'll be honest with you. I never thought about it to that level of you've got multiple people in a room for hours and
kids with very small bladders. How long's the event? Typically.
The actual event usually 5 minutes?
Yeah. So you have to evaluate as part of your ongoing evaluation of your status.
I mean, the attack will be whatever is 5 minutes, but then
you have other things happening, right?
For all the emergency responders to do their thing, whatever that means, and I mean that could be
down the road, right?
Many, many hours.
Yeah, it could be. But the fact of the matter is at some point you're going to have to evacuate these kids from their classrooms. So do that as quickly as practical. Don't just forget about them and say they're locked down, they're good. They're not good. Some of them need medication. Some of them need food.
Yeah.
Some of them, there's all these things that they need. Let's start addressing that. But that has to come from the command level. So when you're worried about in a lockdown situation, you're worried about fatalities, injuries, crime scene, and so forth. The closer you are to the actual site, the longer you're going to be there. Right? But if you're on the other side, down at the other end of the hallway or wing, or you're upstairs and this is downstairs, can we get them out without disturbing all of that stuff, without witnessing all of that stuff? Can we get them can we rotate and get them to the bathroom? Right? Can we move them to the evacuation assembly area? Do we have the resources to do that while still keeping the integrity of the scene? So what we're really talking about is, can we start having multiple operations going simultaneously, addressing the actual issue and then having an evacuation operation and checking the building, like, can I check rooms and evacuate at the same time? I don't know. I'm just saying, can't have that as a consideration so that we can start moving this along better. That's what management is about. Managing that incident and saying, okay, how can I get this done effectively? Decreasing the impacts, mitigating the impacts. The longer I keep them in their room, the more uncomfortable they are, the greater the likelihood we're going to have long-lasting impacts.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.